Let me do that right now. Yeah, David, how are you?
I'm good. How's it going?
It's going
What's
well.
what's your preferred public name? Little
I
Panda?
just I go by Little Panda here,
All
but
right, Panda. Yeah, or
yeah.
Lil.
Yeah, I just shared that tweet with you. GM, welcome everyone. Got David Phillips here. This is you on screen, right?
Phelps.
At
No,
Divine
yeah,
underscore economy.
that's me.
Yeah, want to talk about cows, JokeDAO, bribery. Let's start with cows. I remember reading something you wrote about cows, and it
Yeah.
really sort of sat with me. And what I remember is you wrote something about the eyes in a cow.
Mm-hmm.
Can
Mm-hmm.
you talk about kind of what led you to notice that and what your experience has been with cows?
I can talk about cows and cow eyes. I grew up an only child with a single mom in upstate New York, which is a somewhat lonely life to to lead. And so you end up spending a lot of time with animals when you're a kid. And so I was in cow country, and I would spend a lot of time with cats and dogs, horses, sheep, etc. But always had, I would say, a particular love for cows. Um, I think cows are never afraid to look at you directly, which is fairly remarkable for a prey animal. Like they occupy this, interesting position where they're both technically prey, right? But they're also bulls. They're strong. They're, very, very challenging for any predator to get to. And so they have this inner strength mixed with this humility in a way that can only come with like a prey animal rather than a predator animal, but also with this incredible confidence to look you in the eyes. And so, yeah, I think it's this mystical thing when you look at a cow, because you don't ever know what it's thinking, but it is very confident and able to see you. At the same time, I don't know that we can always see it, and so yeah, it's I think they're very funny. I think they're very humorous. I think they're also just very beautiful, very strong. Our I could go on about cows for a while and the society's relationship to cows, which is also a fascinating thing that I used to write about. But yeah, the cow eyes are this kind of mystical experience of I think looking into something that you can't fully understand, but you can at least grasp is very very funny.
Yeah, and you kind of turned your own personal branding into the cows, right? Because you have Cow Fund.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, yeah, I will always happily be associated. I'm also vegan. I don't eat any cow products. It's an important thing for me personally, to try to coexist with the cows, however we can.
Yeah, you're one of these mega polyglots here in that your interests in writing really kind of spans across I don't know how to even describe it. Across Web3, across crypto, across technology. Um, how do you how do you describe yourself? You
I
got so
don't.
much going on. What do you
Yeah, the
say?
key is not to. Uh, no, I think yeah, I'm a builder. Is how I describe myself. I want to build things that are useful for people.
Fair enough. It's a
Everything
great.
else to that is a means to the end. Writing is a way to understand better how to build, to think about what I want to build. Building a Twitter following is maybe in of itself an act of building, but primarily a means to be able to develop the network so that I can build the things I want to build. Like that's fundamentally what I care about.
Yeah. And I spent some time. I kind of got to know you when you were building JokeDAO last year.
Yeah,
And that's really kind of what I wanted to have you come on to talk about.
yeah.
And I want to start by I feel like just kind of being in a Telegram chat with you and on Twitter, I really got kind of a backseat to sort of watch you build. And what really I would say it impressed me, it also kind of inspired me, was just how determined you were. and just how gritty you were and just banging out those tweets day after day, hitting those contests week after week,
Yeah.
just doing everything manually.
Yeah,
Just
I ran the first 40 myself, and it would take like 3 hours a week to set the whole thing up. But I thought it was good for me to experience the pain points of the platform personally, so that I understood them for anyone else that would have to go through them too.
yeah. Did you have you always been like that? Have you always had this sort of grit, or is that something you've learned over time, or what do you kind of trace that to?
Yeah, I don't, it's not always an advantage, right? Like being able to effectively delegate out tasks for other people to perform without trying to take on everything yourself, I think can also be a real virtue. So grittiness, and I appreciate this. Like that's a super kind thing to say, and I think that's a fairly accurate assessment. Like the one thing that I tend to be is pretty relentless. But it's not always a good thing, right? So either like it can run different directions. Like there's an argument for laziness, I think, as well. If you can hire people who are better than you are and delegate out to them. But yeah, I appreciate that. Yeah, I like to take on a lot of tasks myself, for better and for worse. I designed the entire JokeDAO site myself. That's all of it visually. It's done by me, just about. So yeah, the articles too. I can't take any of the technical credit. Like, as important it is to be gritty, etc. Like collaboration is really what unlocks things, and this is just as much a product of my co-founder Sean's technical vision as it is of my own my own grittiness and in wanting a better decision making platform to exist in the world. But yeah, I would say yeah, I've probably been pretty tenacious since since I was young.
I didn't know you designed this. Like you designed it with, like, what did you use to design
Figma,
this?
Figma.
Figma, really?
Yeah,
Do you have that Figma file at all? Any
I
chance you
do.
could share
Yeah.
that with us? I'd love sort of.
I don't think I can share it because it has a bunch of new stuff that we're working on too. It looks pretty similar to the one that you can see on the site. Like it's about 90% the same. There's still a lot of little UI UX things that I would really like to improve, so I keep adding to our GitHub as well. Um, I wouldn't say I'm particularly proud of it visually. I think it's going to be quite good. Down the line, but it's one of those things where it's iterative. Like, the key thing is getting something out there and seeing how people use it, and then finding where the pain points are and improving on those. And that's, very much how we built the entire thing as well. So I would even say, like, even in its current form, it's probably about 60% of the way there to how I imagine this visually, what this will ultimately look like.
Yeah. I like the simplicity. Agree with everything you said there about design being iterative, but I like the dual layers. I really like this font you chose, or someone chose to
Lato.
with the
Yeah,
name
that's
of this
Lato.
font.
Yeah, Lato is one that I've been a big fan of for a long time. I'm trying to remember where I discovered it. But yeah, so I worked on making apps for almost a decade actually, and so built a number of apps with my co-founder, and then we had actual designers, and so I would participate in Figma with all of that and kind of taught myself through that process UI and UX. And really the best way to learn it is to do it really badly, which is what I did. Like really just fucking things up. I'm not sure if I'm allowed to swear on the show, but like, yeah, really screwing things up over and over again, was a really good lesson. And so out of a lot of that, there's a lot of iteration with colors, fonts, etc. And Lato is one that I've become fond of. It's funny. It's interesting you say that because I've been facing this temptation over the past week to move to Enter, which is a more popular landing page font, and to try to use that one instead. It's a little bolder. It has like a little bit more kind of clarion, like call to action ish vibe to it. Whereas Lato, I think tends to be like a little bit classier, as a sans serif, and like yeah, like a little bit more elegant. And so it's a question of balancing that. I think one key thing is like in having a site called JokeDAO or Joke, it's really important that it should look elegant. Like it really needs to look like you know something that does not look like a joke, to pull off that brand.
How do you spell Lato? The font? I'll find
LATO, I believe.
LAPO. Got it. Got it. And then what about the title font of JokeDAO here, this yellow font? What
Yeah,
would you
I forget the name of that one. I spent a while looking up 80s arcade fonts, and trying to find like what I could get that would look like an 80s arcade font. You know, in Web3, it's very popular to have like very pixelated fonts and designs to kind of like do this throwback to like late 80s, early 90s, kind of like, you know, NES arcade game style games, which makes sense because a lot of those games like Dope Wars or whatever, you know, were about like buying and trading in this like really simple function. And so I love that aesthetic. I grew up with it. I also don't think it's, you know, particularly useful for users most of the time. And so like if you want to get away with it, you can get away with it with maybe one word. And so I'd have to look up which font I ended up landing on for that one. But yeah, definitely to like call attention to this being like kind of an arcade game in a way, which is very much how I see the contest. Like this is very much, you should feel like you're stepping into an arcade. There's all these, you know, contests that are featured there where you can win rewards, and then you can play in each of them and like, you know, earn from that as well.
Yeah, so let's set the stage, and then I want to go into the actual UI here. For people who
Mm-hmm.
aren't familiar with JokeDAO, you might think it's about jokes. What it's really about is governance, right? It's about iterating and gaming in DAO governance. And so, how did you come to name it JokeDAO, or how did you kind of have that entree into governance?
Yeah. So this came out of my participating in a bunch of DAOs and seeing issues, and I would say there were kind of two big issues that I was seeing, and one was that um, voting was considered to be the atomic unit of decision making within communities. And so what would happen was you would have these like DAO structures. I mean, most DAOs are still run this way. That are a lot like corporations, right? Where like a core team makes, you know, a proposal, and then the community approves it, or, you know, they say yes or no to it. And this felt kind of like a travesty to me, because like that's just a corporate structure of like, you know, you go to the board and the board, you know, says yes or no to the founders. But even the board is a pretty permissioned set of like, you know, experts. And what we were doing instead is we were like, you know, just letting any random token holder have voting power, but not actually have a say in the community. Like they didn't actually get to participate in the proposals themselves. And to the extent they did, it was through stuff like, you know, discourse, where it's just this messy, contentious forum process that's totally unactionable, totally not proactive, and just, you know, creates a lot of dispute. And so that was like one issue, is like, how do you actually unlock the voices of community, right? Like that was one issue I was seeing. And the second issue was really retention, which was like, you know, we see this over and over again in crypto. Like these projects are really good at acquiring people because they drop them a token, and then as soon as they get the token, they don't want to stay there anymore. They go to the next place where they can start airdrop farming to try to get tokens instead. And you have a bunch of mercenaries who are like not really compelled to stay there. And even if they try to stay there, there's nothing for them to do. They go to a Discord, it's like a bunch of messages, and they can like kind of DM this group of people they've never probably met in real life. And it feels like a cool kids club of people they don't really know. And it, you know, at least this irony, right, which is like the really successful social DAOs are not actually the social DAOs. Like the really successful social DAOs are like MakerDAO, because at least it's like a bunch of people who are aligned around building something together. And so like those become better socially, despite all their messiness, all their issues, than a lot of the social DAOs do. And so when I came up with this thing called the joke race, which was like this, you know, early iteration of what currently exists as the joke race, and this is with Daria from Layer 3 and Ashita from Asari, and we were like iterating on like, you know, what would this thing look like where people could like play a game for jokes, you know, to vote on like basically worst joke every week, and create a user generated NFT collection out of that. I came up with this primitive, right, where it was like, okay, you know, people would submit these options and they'd vote on them. And then I looked at that and I thought, holy shit, because this, like, if this could work, this could solve those issues, right? Like, if this could work, you could actually let anybody be submitting from the community to have their voices heard, right? And then the voters don't even need to be everybody. They could be, but they could also just be like a small group, right? It could be like you have the community submitting options and the core team votes, right? And I was also thinking, you know, like if you gamify this, where it's like people are trying to win and they have incentives to try to win, like for them to win means that they have to collaborate with each other. Like in order for this decision-making process to work, they actually have to get together, right? Pool their votes, and play these strategy games, which are, kind of anxiety inducing, where you have to think about like, well, do I give all my votes to the option I really want, or do I like give it to the one that's more likely to win if I give it my votes? And so you start playing these strategy games where the only way to win is collaboration. And I got really excited by this because it totally upends, our traditional idea of decision making, which is like, voting governance, like these things need to represent each, individual uncorruptible, opinion of a voter in terms of what they think. And like we just inherited all of that from governments that have 300 million people, in which the only way to effectively coordinate 300 million people is to make sure that like each person has their own voice being heard individually and not being corrupted by others. But if you think about a group of 10 people or 100 people, like the best decision making process is actually the one that would look like corruption on a greater scale, right? It's the one that actually like incentivizes people to have to collaborate with each other and build relationships and discuss the options with each other and to change each other's minds and to negotiate. And like even if they don't come to a better decision, and I think they will, but even if they don't come to a better decision through that negotiation compromise, they're building long-term relationships that will lead to the better health of the DAO, and they're building enthusiasm and excitement around those decisions as well, right? And so like that's where I got excited, was to say like, what if the DAO is not actually like the token holders as much as it is each of the communities that rise up through this. It's just a collection of sub DAOs of people who are all collaborating to try to win this thing every week. Like if we gamify this process enough, can it be really fun? Can it be something people actively want to participate in every week, despite it being as silly as hell? And like, can it actually build relationships? And we started seeing that happening, right? We started seeing these groups like Joke Cartel form, where you started, these like groups that would rise up to try to like compete and win every week. And then they would create Telegram groups, and like every week there's just really active contingent of people who like book this on their calendar, because it's so petty and it's so trivial and it's so fun. And so like that was really the whole thesis. So I didn't answer the question, which is like, after all this rambling, like why joke? So of course it came out of this thing, which was like telling jokes. The other, the more pretentious answer is like, one is that jokes are really the original decentralized technology. I think about like blue songs or old traditions, things like this that are past P2P, and you don't know who originated it. You don't know where it came from, and that doesn't matter, because what matters is the retelling of the thing. And thinking about like P2P economies and how those have always existed. Like jokes are this really beautiful artistic creation where, they don't get credit. We say jokes are the opposite of serious. But actually jokes are very serious, and they're actually tend to deal with the most serious issues as well. So that was part of it, for sure. And then I think the other part is just thinking that like Web3 has this jokiness to it that I love, which is to say nothing is sacred. Like whatever smart contract you're looking at, we can fork it, we can improve it, we can change it, we can build on it. Like not taking things seriously and not taking them as canon, as canonical, as sacrosanct, like that's kind of the core to Web3 being able to operate and innovate, is by not taking things seriously. And so I think, the degen brand of it, I think hopefully plays right into, the actual aspirations of the project.
Mm-hmm. One thing you did, or someone did with JokeDAO early on that really got my attention was at one point the winner of the joke race was the joke that got the second place, right?
That's still the case. Yeah.
So how did that come about, and what did you learn from that?
Yeah. So if you just let the winner be the first place, and then people win rewards for voting on first place, then what'll happen is like after 5 minutes into the game, everyone will just start aping into the first place option, right? They're all going to say like, this is the best one for me to win. And then you don't really have a game anymore. There's no real battle. If you say it's second place that has to win, now suddenly there's a battle. Because like as soon as you start getting into first place, you're losing. And so you either want to like downvote yourself, or you want to vote on another option instead, or you're trying to like deploy votes but not deploy too many. Or if you're a whale, you're always at risk, right? That if you put too many votes onto an option, you're actually going to lose. And so it was really thinking like, what are the game mechanics that you can come up with, that like force people to have to collaborate and force people to not just to actually have to play with game theory, right, in order to win. Now, of course, that doesn't scale to like a regular governance decision, right? If you wanted to reward people for voting on like who should be added to the multi-sig, you'd have a lot of people who would be incentivized to just vote for the first place option. And in fact, we already see people, in delegation tools often just resorting to first place option, and anyhow, right? So that's like where other tools I think will become really important. We're working right now with Joke Race Council to work with creators on like actually incubating games that they can deploy through us for their own communities as well. And there's a lot of these other kind of like game design mechanics that you can think about. It would also be useful for actual governance too. So like, for example, vote decay. Like if you vote early on, your vote counts a lot more. If you vote later on, it counts for a lot less, right? And so, that's something that can be really useful for saying like, if you have a strong opinion, you can get much greater rewards for doing it early, but there's also much greater risk that you're not going to win versus later on, right? It's like an investment, almost like an investment game. It's like you get a lot lower volatility, you're much more likely to win, but you're going to win a lot less. Like there's less risk and less reward as well. And so playing that piece is another way to gamify everything, of making everyone like trying to get to the buzzer as quickly as possible, but like also wanting to wait and trying to balance that out in a way that actually could be really effective at rewarding people who have really strong opinions and then up front, and then rewarding people who are willing to support those and collaborate and back them later on.
Yep. Okay, so I want to come back to game. You keep using the word game.
Yep.
I love, and I want to kind of dive into that later. But first, I want to show JokeDAO. I want to get through kind of the UI, the value prop, who can use it. And I picked out this here. You actually sent me this one. This was Rehash, which is a podcast.
Yep.
We used the JokeDAO platform here to kind of figure out who the guests would be on in the season.
Yep.
So can you sort of set the stage for what were the rules here for this game, and how did it play out?
Yeah, so this is Diana from Rehash set this up, and this is a podcast DAO, right? Where anyone who is on the podcast or has supported the podcast gets to pick and vote on future guests. So the way she set it up is the same people get to submit, get to vote. So part of what's unique about our system is you always get to decide who submits, who votes. And those could be subsets of each other. They could be totally separate. One can be small, one can be bigger. They can be the same, however you want to design it. So she designed them to be the same. So in other words, the NFT holders of this project, of Rehash, who have either been on the show or have bought an NFT, are the participants. And so they're the players in this game, and they get to submit who they want up front, and then they get to vote on who they want later. And so I think, if I'm remembering correctly, it was like a 1 week submission period or so. Let's see what it says. 16th to 23rd. Yeah. So 1 week. Yeah. 1 week submission period and 1 week voting period, limited only to NFT holders. And, I said to Diana, like, why don't you open this up? Like, let anybody submit and then only the NFT holders vote. There's still incentives for people to buy the NFT so that they get to vote, but you're going to bring a lot more people into the community. And she said, no, you can go screw yourself. Well, absolutely not. That makes no sense. Like the whole point is like the submissions are the really fun part, right? That you get to participate in. And so what happened was she launches this contest, right? It's 7 days, submission, 7 days voting. Day one goes by. There's like one submission by the end of the day. And I'm thinking like, okay, this is, I don't know, man. Like, I don't know if this is going to work. Like, nobody participated, right? Like, you should have opened this up. You should have let, like, everybody submit, right? But, of course, Diana, who's, a much better dungeon master than I am, has a plan. And the plan is that because it's 1 week for submissions and 1 week for voting, and because it is people who are submitting other people, you have many excuses here for virality on social media, because you get 1 week to start promoting each of these submissions, talking about, who's popular, who's there. You have an excuse to tag them because you can tag the people who submitted as well as the people who voted as well, right? And then they're going to retweet it as well. So by the end of the 1 week, you can see how many submissions she got. It was like tons, right? Like if she had opened this up to a broader audience, it would have just been like totally overwhelming, and much lower noise, and you wouldn't have gotten the benefits for the NFT community. So she completely did it the right way. Like this is 100%, how to set it up, but it's because she's also a master of like being gritty, right? Like going on social media every day, not just posting about it, but having an excuse to ping and tag people. And I think it's like that started getting it to go viral, and also gives it legitimacy because you see who else is participating and you also want to participate when they're participating too, right? So there's an element of FOMO as well. And then she just ran the whole playbook all over again on voting. And it was just like, yeah, this has been one of our most successful contests, because she really understood the ways that you can use this kind of format, not just for like financial incentives, which is what a lot of people lean on, but social incentives. And like Diana's focus has really, really been on the social incentive piece of like being able to tag people, getting it to go viral, getting other people to want to participate as well, which is just so, so sharp and just like a really, really amazing use case of what you can do with one of these contests.
One thing I want to hit about this that's different than say Snapshot. Like I'm in a couple DAOs that use
Yep.
Snapshot for temp checks, but with JokeDAO, you don't necessarily need a token already out there. You can put in a list of addresses and you airdrop out tokens for this vote specifically, right?
Yep, exactly. So you mint a voting token on whatever chain you run this on. So we are chain agnostic on any EVM compatible chain. You just connect your wallet to that chain. When you deploy a contest, you're actually deploying a smart contract to that chain. And so you just can mint a voting token, share that with whoever you want. And what that means, right, is that you can choose who gets to participate. You can also choose how much voting power they have. But maybe the coolest thing is like you can effectively launch a DAO through us. Like if you want to have a whole community come together, put rewards in, decide how they want to spend those rewards, automatically deploy those rewards to the objective. Like if you imagine like what would have preceded Constitution DAO, what if people had decided on something else besides the Constitution? Like it would be us, right? Like you can start an entire DAO that way because you're launching a token for your community to set an objective, and you have a token, a community objective. You have a DAO, and so we've seen a lot of like cool DAOs rise up through us too, which has been really exciting. We've had analytics DAOs. We had like an imaginary animal naming DAO. We had hiking DAOs, and so it's just like it's really fun to see that people are actually launching communities and then figuring out what they want to do using us as well.
What was it? What was animal? What was Animal DAO?
Oh my god, that one's an amazing one. I should have shared that one. It was a Slurtle naming DAO. So I have no idea who these people were. Never talked to them, but found this contest on our site one night, and I looked through it, and it was like, what do we name a Slurtle? And I was like, what's a Slurtle? And it turns out it's an imaginary animal that this community had created, and then they wanted to name it, and so they had an entire contest where they were like, do we call it like Slurty McSlurtle face? Do we call it like Girdle the Slurtle? Do we call it Myrtle the Slurtle? And it was a contentious, long, like totally engaged process that they were doing. My suspicion also is a lot of times the contests are really successful when they're done in conjunction with live calls, so that you have a community come together. They're all submitting options during the call, and then they all go to the voting in the last 10 minutes, and they play the game right at the very end of like, what their priorities were, etc. And so I have a suspicion that was probably done in a live call, given the engagement that it had. But it was just a wonderful, beautiful use of just the kind of like absolutely idiotic, beautiful things that you can do on using us.
Awesome. And you can also do visuals. Like this was
Yep.
choosing the next logo. They posted a bunch of different iterations, and then people could vote on it.
Yeah, so sponsored contests are something that I think is really interesting. If you have a talent DAO, like an analytics DAO or like a graphic design DAO, you can actually get other protocols to sponsor you and say, hey, we'll give you $10,000, to do a contest for our logo, or we'll give you $10,000 to do analytics on our project. Like you set it up so like $5,000 goes to the first place, and like $3,000 goes to the second place, and like $2,000 just goes straight to the DAO, right? And now you have everyone in the DAO all participating in these contests to try to win. They all know that because they're talent anyway, they're going to win something. But if they get the winning design, right, then they win that award, and they get the commission, and they get the on-chain reputation as well. And so this is a much simpler version of that, where the creator just uploaded the images themselves for what to vote on for their logo. But some analytics DAOs have used us for the case I just described, and I think you can imagine graphic design DAOs also using us for that kind of case, where it's actually a way to start building revenue for communities.
And reputation, right? Because if I'm in a
Yes.
graphic design one and I keep winning,
Yes.
it shows that I've got, I'm gritty, I can keep submitting, but also I'm popular. I'm winning these votes.
Right. And then you imagine like a new graphic design studio comes along and they want to airdrop a token, or they want to find people and hire them, right? Where do they look? Like 100%. So the reputation is a really interesting thing, because you could every vote is an attestation as to the value of your contribution to a community. And so like you're building out this like really powerful layer to show, like as an attestation of your own value to that individual community in a way that other communities might want to reward later too. And I think like it's going to take a while to, for people to realize this, but like at some point there'll be a protocol that comes and uses us to airdrop their token, because if you want to airdrop in a way that is effective, right, and it can't be botted and is based on qualitative like assessment of actual value of someone's contribution, then we're the way to do it. And so like it'll be, at that point, once that, whatever protocol it is, gives their tokens out to these participants, who have these high attestations, I think at that point everyone will realize, okay, shit, we need to start participating in these contests more, because even if we lose, we're building powerful on-chain reputation.
Yep. Reputation and social cohesion, friendships, that sort of shared experience. What kind of users are you looking for? Who are the ideal kind of groups? Who do you, when you wake up tomorrow, what kind of contests do you like to see on this site? What are you looking for?
Yeah, diversity I think is crucial, and no one likes this answer. But if you think about ChatGPT, if you had to say like, I don't know, what's the ideal use case for ChatGPT?
Oh man, everything.
Right. Exactly. And what is ChatGPT, right? It's a prompt followed by an answer. And what are we? We're a prompt followed by a series of answers followed by a series of votes, right? Like this is a tool that, yeah, it can be used for DAO governance, right? You can run your DAO governance and decide who you add to the multisig and like who gets assigned to a certain role and who you want to delegate and nominate and run elections, and like refine proposals, and like we can do all of that. But I think what excites me is expanding the idea of a DAO. And to the point that people won't even be using the word DAO. They'll just be thinking about those as online communities, right? And thinking any online community that wants to make a decision, we're the way to do that. And that can be the decision to start an online community, a decision to, choose what they pull that capital to in that online community. I get really excited by that, because I think, if a DAO is just a way for a bunch of people to collaborate to pull capital together to a cause, like that's fundamentally what we're building, right? I think that's exciting. If you think about projects that want to get user-generated feedback to say like, what features do you want us to build? And they could say like, we'll give $5,000 to the winner, and then we're not obligated to actually build any of these. We just get like really powerful data on what our community actually wants us to do. They've effectively paid $5,000 for a ton of really, really useful data, right? That gets me really excited. Thinking about games, like creators who can come up with games. Can't quite reveal this roadmap yet, but there's like a number of creators we're talking to about actually like running games through us, as well. And I think those get really exciting too, as a way of like creating more interactive communities that are incentivized to participate as well. The two things that get me most excited personally are the opportunity for communities to actually build revenue using us. And there's a number of ways that I think they'll be able to do that, whether that's like charging people to participate, taking a cut of the rewards pool, doing sponsored contests, etc., pooling capital, right, and taking a cut of that. Like all of these are going to be ways that communities actually can become financially self-sustaining. So I think that's really exciting. And then just creating more interactivity, right? More interaction within communities where they're incentivized to have to work together, collaborate, and play together. Like anything that involves that, I get really excited by. It's why I talk about the Sortal contest and everyone's like, this is so stupid. This is why you're not mission centric. This is why you won't, you're not building something of actual meaningful, serious value. And that's where I just totally disagree. If you can nail fun, everything else can come out of that online.
Let's double click into gaming, but first,
Yeah.
I want to kind of set the stage for. Not most people, I would say, are not as deep into crypto as you are, as I am.
Yeah, hopefully not. Yeah.
And I'm trying to kind of set the stage here about what's at stake, because you
Yeah.
and I, we both vote in DAOs, and we both,
Yep.
vote on things that are sort of silly. But what's kind of the big picture here? If you fast forward a couple hundred years, how big or how important do you think there are going to be literally on-chain votes over?
Yep. Yeah.
And what are the stakes?
Huge. I don't think we can conceive quite how big this is. So you think about the dream of the internet, right? Like, I don't know, I say this a lot, like Bill Gates goes on Letterman in like 1996, and Letterman's like, what's this internet thing? Like, why does everyone like this internet? And Bill Gates kind of, stumbles a little bit, and he's like, well, if you like have this obscure interest and like someone else has that obscure interest, like you can't really meet them locally, but you can meet them on the internet. Like, I really like cigars, and I don't know that many people like cigars, but now I can go into, like a chat room and I can find all these people who like cigars. And Letterman just roasts him, right? Letterman's like, are you out of your mind? Like, okay, the whole TAM of this internet thing is to like find people who like cigars. You're crazy. And of course, what Bill Gates is saying, right, is like the long tail of interests is so much bigger than the mainstream, right? Then if you're in a locality, like you're in a small town, like I was, everyone congregates around the least common denominator of shared interests. And that stuff is like football and like musical theater, right? Like these are things that tend to be like broadly acceptable, broadly liked in major categories within localities. But if you're into weirder, stranger stuff like experimental film, which is what I was into, like you have to go to the internet to find that. And then what you realize is like that long tail of like all these subcultures is so much bigger, right? Overall, than that least common denominator that just people were gathering around because it was the thing they could find in common with each other. Like it wasn't necessarily the thing they were most passionate about. Stuff they're most passionate about tends to be weirder and stranger and more unique. And so what's the dream of the internet? Like the dream of the internet, right, is like those chat rooms in 1994, 1995 in AOL, where people are getting together and they're talking about these shared interests. Like what's the dream of the internet, right? It's like you go to the 2000s and it's like now you have MySpace, right? Friendster. You get like Facebook groups. People start creating all these Facebook groups around shared interests, right? Like what's the dream of the internet? Like you go to the 2010s, Reddit groups everywhere, right? Where you can find somebody who shares that. I was just staying with a friend and she's like really into plumbing and electricity. And you can imagine like a woman living in a major city, how easy is it for her to have conversations about plumbing and electricity with her friends, right? But on Reddit, so easy. And you think about all of that and you think, okay, that financial opportunity has been gigantic, right? But that's a financial opportunity without financial rails. That's a financial opportunity without social incentives for decision making, right? That's a financial like opportunity without like the reputation building. And most importantly, like that's a financial opportunity without like executability. If you make a decision, you can't automatically execute it. On chain, like, this is what my co-founder Sean always says, like at the end of the day, it's the blockchain is an open API. And so like if you're making a decision through us, you can automatically execute that in any other service on the chain, right? And that's what's amazing is like we're building something that looks like a platform, but it's actually a protocol because anyone can build on top of it for the results of a vote, to trigger an action as well. And like that's where this gets so exciting because it's like, okay, and now go back and imagine, AOL like chat room, imagine Friendster and MySpace, Tumblr, Reddit, Facebook groups. Now imagine them Twitter, right? With financial rails. Like imagine every time you went to vote on something, you could vote for a donation. Like all of that is going to be totally possible within probably the next 5 years to build that kind of social experience with financial rails baked in. And the opportunity for that is just beyond anything we know, because not only like can you benefit from that by capturing those rails, those financial rails, but like you're also giving a way for these communities to become self-sustaining. These communities don't need to become billion-dollar companies. They don't need to become gigantic, but they do need to be able to sustain themselves and pay people in order to continue operating. And they can do that effectively, right? By having the financial rails of crypto with the reputation building incentives, the social incentives, and the executability of what's effectively an open API. So I don't think we have any idea how big this is right now.
Yeah. Yeah. And big sort of on a micro scale and a macro scale in that, like I could be working for a DAO and there could be a vote about whether I keep my job or get paid or not. I mean, those kinds of decisions can have vast consequences.
Yep.
But also in just current IRL right now, I mean, you have religious bodies, right,
Yep.
that have a governance council of some kind that make decisions that are very consequential. You
Homeowners
have,
associations, right?
yeah,
Like just if you own an apartment and you're trying to make like you're trying to vote in your homeowners association about like what the budget is, who gets elected, it's like impossible to do that, right? Half the building is like maybe controlled by like the owners who are like renting it out. Well, that half the building never appears, right? The other half can't make it to the meeting that's on a Thursday at 6 p.m. in the lobby. Like imagine doing that all on chain. It's huge. I mean, it's just and it's like that's a tiny subset, right, of the opportunity at play here.
Yeah. Okay, now let's, if we can, zoom in here on this. You called it a primitive, and I hadn't really thought of
Yep.
it like that today, but the game,
Yep.
sort of a game as a primitive. I am so completely on board with you about gaming, and to think of it sort of as a primitive. Let's sort of put that into context here with decisions that are being made, and sometimes it's more of a game than other times, gamified. What can you talk about why that's so powerful? Why that has so much resonance with you? Why games are so much more successful? Things that are gamified.
Yeah, I think I grew up in a generation where the major coordination, you know, man, you think about like 2004. What's going on in 2004? You're looking at like, the Bush invasion of Iraq, which is an absolute shit show, and just a travesty in every possible way. And just a failure of coordination at every level, right? A failure of like coordinating the American people properly, of coordinating internally, and there's nefarious motives for this, but like it absolutely just like looking at that, and we see this over and over again. The 2008 crash, right? The pandemic, like all these giant centralized entities that are supposed to be, the top experts and people in the world making these like absolutely bungled decisions, right? Because they can't make decisions properly. And meanwhile, like what is everyone on the ground doing? Like meanwhile, like, a bunch of teenagers like were what playing like, EverQuest and World of Warcraft, and like all of that is decision making, right? Like it's all just like coordinating people together to be able to make decisions about, swapping skins and like, trading tools, etc. And it's like massively successful. Like there everyone is able to coordinate like really, really well. And I think it's like anyone who's grown up since then, right, probably just like bears that imprint, of that dichotomy, that like you are looking at these centralized entities that just can't coordinate well, and then as soon as you gamify it on this local level, it's like suddenly everybody wants to coordinate because it's a way to socialize, it's a way to build reputation, right? It's a way to win things like financially within certain currencies. Those things tend to get tied together, as different forms of status too. And that's what effective decision making is, and that's like also the basis, right, for crypto. Like crypto comes out of World of Warcraft, like very, very clearly. Um and and it's like to expect that people are, going to care about a community without being able to develop social relationships with everyone else is ridiculous. And the way that humans fundamentally form social relationships with each other, right, is games. Like that's where we come together, we let out our aggression, and then we celebrate. Like you look at the ending of the Iliad, right? Like the final chapter of the Iliad, like they all come back from war, and what's the first thing they do? They all start playing war games with each other, because that's how they can bond and relate and kind of process the trauma of what they've been through. And so yeah, to expect that there's any way that people will operate on the internet that's not gamified, like Packy McCormick's thesis, right? The great online game is just totally on point. Like people play the internet. They don't browse the internet, they play the internet. And like if we're expecting, communities to rise up and to build social relationships, like there is no way to do that, that is not gamified, in my opinion.
Yeah. And I mean, the way that you've built a Twitter audience, the way that you're building JokeDAO, I mean,
Yeah.
do you ever think of that as you're playing this great online game?
Yes, always, always. Yeah, that's a persona, right? Like David Phelps is not. I don't think it's really me. Maybe a version of myself. But I think that's true for anyone who's like built a successful following, right? It's a side of me. But it's a persona. It's a persona of someone who only cares about crypto, right? Only talks about crypto, only lives and breathes crypto, which is absolutely not who I am as a human being. But like, yeah, it's really important to play that game, right? And you always know like the tweets that are more aggressive, that leave out the nuance, that make the case but do so in an ironic shitposting way where they can credibly be undermined without losing, the core argument. Like all of those will always be more successful. I don't always play that game. There's times where I want to play a more serious game of actually just saying what I think. But yeah, completely. Like it's all a game, and it's a social game, right? To build social relationships. Like what's great about Twitter is not the thoughts. What's great about Twitter is not the tweets. Like what's great about Twitter is the people you get to meet, and you get to interact with and build friendships with. Like it's a social game, and that's what's really fun to play.
One of your skills that's really struck me is writing. I'd
Thank
love
you.
to read your writing, and
Oh my
I'd
God,
love
thank you. Yeah,
to dive in a bit if we can. This, and I want to show off your Substack here. Three Quirks. I wish you published more
yeah.
often.
Me
Uh,
too.
davidphelps.substack.com. But
Yeah,
can you talk me through how your writing process works? Like how one of these long form articles, because I know you also use a lot of visual, you use a lot of art, and some of it you make,
mm,
some of it you
yep,
find,
yep.
and you put like your tweets in and you write them. And I'd really love to just hear a bit about your process and how you put these kinds of things together.
Oh man, thanks for asking that. Yeah, I'm a generally pretty slow writer, and both in the sense that the main part of writing is not writing. Like the main part of writing is building up to it and trying to work up the courage to actually put something on paper and doing a lot of research to try to get there, till I can get that until I can get to that point. And then generally the way I write is like having an overall internal structure of like the points that I kind of need to hit. And then almost like I think about it like jazz. It's like that's the melody, and then my job is to riff off the melody, right? Like then the process of writing is like you're improvising off that melody. So like as long as you have those big points, you kind of see where the writing takes you, right? And like I spent most of my life being a writer, so it's like you start getting into these habits of like, as soon as you finish a sentence, like your immediate job is to say, okay, how am I wrong? Right? Like what's the counterpoint? Like what's off about, like what's the missing information? What's the incorrect information? Like what's the incorrect extrapolation? And like once you start playing those games, every sentence starts writing itself because you basically have this kind of like machine for generating thought, that can almost like make interesting thoughts, I think, as well. And then it's endless revision. It's just like pouring over the word and the sound and trying to get the language right so that like and the tone. And it's like if it needs to be funny, like that's an impossible thing to do in writing. Like how do you get that characterization? And yeah, I think you can probably see a development also in the writing, even over I started about 2 years ago. And the pieces back 2 years ago were a lot more cut and dry and kind of a little bit over the place and kind of like a more blog like, I think, as a representation of my thought process because I was writing it every single week. And the pieces now tend to be these like larger, bigger, more operatic kind of pieces where I'm trying to play with a lot of tones and I'm also trying to play with emotion, in a way that I never really did before as a writer. And so yeah, trying to think about that piece of like, you know, how do you tell this as an emotional story, right? With characters, with tone, with voice, with irony, with jokes, all of that as well.
And then did you make this visual here, for
Let me
example?
see.
Uh,
I did make that one. Yeah.
so how does the visual come first? Does it come in the revision process or
Revision. Yeah. Yeah. That's well, it's a back and forth, right? Like that was while I was revising it. I figured that it needed more clarity and then I added that, but then that made me have to revise the actual writing itself. So then I had to go change the words to match it. Then I showed that visual to a bunch of people. They gave me feedback to say why they thought it was right or wrong. Then I revised that visual again. Then I went back and revised the words corresponding to it, etc.
one piece that I don't know if you wrote a piece about it, but bribery. I remember you and I had
Mm-hmm.
a conversation, or maybe you did a webinar or something, but you really said some things that really kind of blew my mind about bribery.
Mm.
Um, and I'd love to kind of flesh that out because I think a lot about that, especially in Little Nouns voting.
Yeah.
What's sort of your thesis on bribery? What's your kind of view that sounds shocking, but is actually true? I mean,
Yeah. Yeah. I'm pretty pro bribery. I think bribery makes a lot of sense. Like bribery is a distribution from whales to poorer entities to get their way in the short term while giving more power to to the minnows, long term. I think bribery is also a form um, of social collaboration where people get together and make the decision. Is this worth it for me to compromise my view in order to earn as well? I think it gamifies the system in a way, and someone else can also bribe too. Like the the argument against all of this would be the premise for the system itself, which is like having tokenized voting, right? Like that is in any way already financialized. And if you don't, you might argue against that, but once you have that in place, the bribery is inevitable. And I think like what's interesting to think about is like if you look at MEV, right? For example, like MEV is just a bribery issue, right? It's just the block builders are basically bribing the proposers to include their block, right, in exchange for like part of the earnings from it. And then there's a whole auction process for whoever's going to pay the most, right? Like when you want to totally decentralize the system, right, and you don't want someone totally in charge, then like how do people coordinate with each other to make financial decisions? Well, it's just auctions, and auctions are just a form of bribery, right? An auction is just an election with money. And so like a lot of what we think about as the voting is like these are elections, but they're elections with money. Like effectively, there's a way in which these are all auctions all the way down, using these tokens as well. And so I think like what is delegation? Like delegation, it's like you are giving over your voting power to someone to represent you, but like you hope that they're going to provide greater revenue to you. Like how is that not bribery, right? Like it's someone saying, hey, give me your voting power and I'm going to get you money for it. Like this is it's bribery all the way down. And I think like part of the issue here is like thinking, well, are we compromising actual good decisions, right? Like are we compromising good decisions because we're just letting people follow financial incentives instead? And this is always the argument, right, against financial incentives and why financial incentives are dangerous. And it's totally true. Financial incentives are dangerous for this reason, right? But like if those can effectively be balanced by the social participation, if they actually can build better social cohesion by like letting people collaborate with each other, and if the bad decisions ultimately kill the project and kill everyone who participated in bribery and then leave the other projects that forked them that didn't participate in bribery, then that's fine. Like this is all part of like growing a healthy ecosystem, in which we're experimenting with different forms as well. But yeah, I think bribery tends to get bribery can be a bad thing, 100%, just like MEV can be a bad thing, 100%. But like overall, the ability of people to actually collaborate with each other socially and being able to share each other's votes and like play those kinds of power games that ultimately redistribute some of the power, like is not something that I would say I'm particularly strongly against. I think it's bribery all the way down.
Yeah. I think we need a new word because there's just a subjective component of
Yes.
bribery that makes
Right. Well, that's what's fun about it.
yeah, we need a new damn word.
Right.
People
Right.
throw
Right.
it around and bribery's bad.
Collaboration. For financially collaborating with each other, right? Like we are all sharing in financial wealth with each other to reach shared conclusions. Like, I have $100 and you have one. I'm like, well, that's too bad. You only have $1. We should each have 50. And like, like I have all this power that I could be using directly for voting, but I want to give it to you so we can start working together. It depends, right? Like it can work different ways. I think the bribery that's successful, right, is less that kind of bribery than the MEV bribery. It's bribery where it's like, you're winning an auction and then getting a share of the rewards. Like if you're making sure that value when it's being created is being distributed among all parties, like that's the kind of power that's meaningful.
Yeah. Yeah. And as we, if you're right about this thesis about voting just becoming more and more important on chain and more decisions moving on chain, which I believe you are, I don't really see how we're not going to go that way. Is bribery stuff, if we're using this word and not really meaning what we say, I don't know. I've seen in a lot of the DAOs I'm in, people just really kind of misunderstand this when it's a subjective statement of when you say someone else is being bribed, you're putting a subjective value judgment into what actually happened without realizing it. You just think you're using an objective term, bribe, but you're not. You're using a subjective thing. So that's my pet peeve. I want to invent a new word for this to kind of explain that it means these two different things.
Yep.
We are running out of time a bit. Kind of a broader question more. I notice you are into art a lot and you write about art and you have kind of a broad, do you have kind of an art history background or what's
I
sort
do.
of background?
Yeah, I studied literature, film, and art. I wrote for academic publications on film and art, catalogs, etc. for my early 20s. So yeah, that part tends to rear its head.
Is there a favorite thing you wrote or studied? I don't know, in college, or a book or a movie or something that um,
I'll
really important to you?
I'll end with a thought here, which is that I spent a lot of time looking at Brecht, Bertolt Brecht, playwright, that's associated with like alienation, the idea that like you have to wake your audience up into like understanding the theatricality and illusion, right, of what they're watching. And so turning on the lights in the theater, right, to recognize that this is all fake, but also that it's all real, that these are real people who are underlying, who are there, and the people on stage are just as real as the people around you, and that you're part of the shared collective together, right? Like this is part of the alienation strategy. And so then I spent a lot of time, like, with Godard, filmmaker who really, really built off quite strongly from Brecht, and doing this, with movies, of constantly calling attention to the ways that all the elements are basically part of a collage that you're watching. And as much as we're always trying to get to like, some feeling of reality within the film, like it feels really real, right? Like I think D.W. Griffith's line is like, you can feel the wind in the trees, and like that's how cinema feels alive to you. Like we're trying to get to feeling the wind in the trees, but Godard always pulls the rug out from under you to show you like, okay, that soundtrack you're listening to is just one of many soundtracks that it could be. I'm going to mute it. I'm going to put on music instead. I'm going to put on dialogue instead. I'm going to put my voice on instead, right? The image can always be changed and transformed, etc. Right? And so, spending years studying and writing about this, very academic material that no one really cares about in any sort of like, mainstream culture, and feeling like, okay, here's all these wonderful artists who want to be so radical and to remove the illusion from our eyes so that we could like form a better collective together, and like totally sympathetic to like working class solidarity, and meanwhile just making stuff for like Ivy League masses, for the ivory tower. And it's kind of disillusioning to be in that mode where you both really admire these artists, but you also feel like this is fundamentally pretty masturbatory. And then you look at core and you get to core, right, which is like this big thing on TikTok right now. And it's like, man, what is core? Like core is like all of that. Like core is just this collage of different elements that are calling attention to the absolute theatricality and fakeness of the media that we consume, but also finding something really moving within that. And you're thinking, this is generational. Like you have a whole generation that is like making and obsessed with like core, right? Like on TikTok. And it's all an extension of the shit that I studied for years that no one cared about. And it's like, you realize, I mean, TikTok is this really powerful thing because, people are not going to go sit down to watch a 4-hour experimental French film in a cinema. But if, 30 seconds comes up on their phone and it's already on and they don't have to do anything to change it, now it's opt out, instead of opt in. And it's only 30 seconds and they can rewatch it and they can engage it and it becomes interactive, right? Suddenly people are willing to be a lot more experimental. And it goes to my point before about like how that long tail of interests and passions is actually so much greater than what we think of as the mainstream. Like you have experimental art film being made by like 16-year-olds. It's pretty amazing right now. And I think like pretty inspiring. And that's possible because of the internet. So I actually think it's a pretty exciting time for media, just not in cinemas these days, more in TikTok.
I love that. Tell me the playwright that you started that riff with. What was
That's
the playwright?
Bertolt Brecht. Yeah, Bertolt space Brecht.
Bertolt Brecht. All right, I'm gonna have to look into that. David, so appreciate your time. I want to hear before we do curtains. Let's make sure people know at Divine Economy, at Divine
Yep.
_ Economy, David
Yep.
Phelps. Curtains here, JokeDAO, JokeDAO.io, free platform, form a group, LFG, do whatever you want, deploy your token.
LFJ.
This is free
Yeah.
to use, right? LFJ, totally
Yep.
free.
Yep.
And the joke race still going on. You can find those on OpenSea. And then if you want to read some really kind of thought-provoking pieces that really stick with you, that you can tell, I really, as I read your work, David, I really can tell how much you refine this. And I really do love, like these squares here. I was looking at these earlier. You did all these, too, right?
Yeah, Malevich homage. Yeah. Yeah.
Beautiful. This is David Phelps, DAVID PHELPS.substack.com. 3 Quarks. I hope you keep writing because I really enjoy getting these in my inbox.
Thank you so much. I really, really appreciate that.
Thanks. Thanks so much for having us, David, or for joining the show.
You bet. My pleasure. All right. Thanks, everyone.
All right.
Bye.
Bye.